The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched so far that the ceiling disappeared into darkness. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy sat in perfect circles, their forms as different as the stars themselves. Some looked like giant crystals that hummed with inner light. Others were clouds of gas that sparkled with tiny lights. A few looked almost human, but with skin that changed colors like a rainbow. At the center of the hall stood Prime Council leader Zethara. She was tall and thin, with 4 arms and skin that looked like polished silver. Her voice carried to every corner of the massive room without any speakers or machines. This was the most important meeting the galaxy had seen in 1,000 years. "Friends of the Council," Zethara began, "we face a mystery that threatens our future. 3 years ago, our scouts found something on the dead world of Kepler 442b, an artifact older than any of our civilizations. We call it the Convergence Key." A hologram appeared above the crowd. It showed a black cube covered in strange symbols that seemed to move and shift when you looked at them. The symbols glowed with a soft blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. "Inside, this artifact is a riddle," Zethara continued. "Our best minds believe that solving this riddle will unlock technology beyond our dreams, the power to travel between galaxies in seconds, the ability to understand any form of life we might meet out there in the dark space between stars." Excited whispers filled the hall in 100 different languages. Some sounded like music, others like the crash of waves, and a few like the grinding of stone on stone. Counselor Vex of the Crystalline Mines floated forward. His body was made of living crystal that sang when he moved. "Prime Leader, my people have worked on this riddle every day for 3 years. We are beings of pure mathematics. Our minds can process 1,000,000 calculations in a single second. Yet, this puzzle defeats us at every turn." Next to speak was the representative of the collective, a being that looked like a human woman, but spoke with the voice of 1,000,000,000,000 minds joined as one. "Our entire species has focused on this problem. Every thought, every dream, every moment of our existence has been directed toward finding the solution. We have failed." An ancient being from the far edge of the galaxy rose next. The architect looked like a mountain of black stone with eyes like burning stars. "My people built the great ring worlds that circle entire suns. We have moved planets and created new forms of life. This simple riddle mocks our greatest achievements." Zethara raised one of her 4 hands for silence. "The riddle appears simple, too simple. It shows what look like numbers and basic mathematical symbols. But every approach we try leads to impossible answers. Every path we follow ends in contradiction." She gestured, and the hologram changed to show the riddle itself. The symbols looked almost familiar, as if they were numbers and math signs that everyone should recognize, but they were arranged in ways that made no sense. When the greatest minds tried to solve it like a math problem, the answers came out wrong. When they tried to solve it like a word puzzle, it made no sense at all. "We have tried every form of logic known to our civilizations," Zethara said. "We have used computers that can think faster than entire planets. We have asked our wisest philosophers and our most creative artists. Nothing works." The mood in the Great Hall grew dark. These were the greatest minds in the galaxy, and they were admitting defeat. Some species had spent their entire civilizations becoming masters of mathematics. Others had evolved beyond physical form to become pure thought. If they could not solve this riddle, who could? "There is one option left," Zethara announced. "We will share this riddle with every member species of the Council. Even the newest and most primitive members will have their chance." Many beings in the hall made sounds of disapproval. The newest members were species that had just learned to travel between stars. How could they solve what the greatest minds in the galaxy could not? Far away from the Great Hall, on a small blue planet in a quiet corner of the galaxy, Jake Martinez walked home from school. He was 12 years old with messy brown hair and a backpack covered in patches from science fiction movies. Jake lived in a small town called Pine Valley just outside Denver, Colorado. Most days, nothing exciting happened in Pine Valley. Jake's favorite things were puzzles and books about space travel. He spent his allowance on puzzle books and science magazines. His room was full of half-finished jigsaw puzzles and model spaceships. His parents, Carol and Steve, worried that he spent too much time alone with his puzzles instead of playing with other kids. But Jake was happy with his puzzles. He could see patterns that other people missed. When his math teacher, Mrs. Peterson, gave the class word problems, Jake always found shortcuts that she had never thought of. When he played games with his friend Danny, Jake could figure out the rules just by watching other people play. Jake had no idea that billions of miles above his head, the smartest beings in the galaxy were struggling with a puzzle of their own. He walked into his house, dropped his backpack by the door, and headed to his room to work on a new crossword puzzle his grandmother had given him. At exactly the same time, the Galactic Council voted to share the riddle with every member species. Within hours, the mysterious symbols would travel across space to reach Earth. Soon, the puzzle that had defeated the galaxy's greatest minds would be sitting on a computer screen in a university laboratory, waiting for someone to notice it. Jake opened his puzzle book and smiled. He had no way of knowing that his life was about to change forever, or that his love of puzzles was about to save the galaxy from tearing itself apart. He was just a boy who liked to solve things that seemed impossible. The greatest challenge in galactic history was coming to Earth, and the only person who could solve it was doing his homework in a small town where nothing exciting ever happened. 3 days after the Galactic Council meeting, Lisa Martinez burst through the front door of her family's house with her laptop bag bouncing against her hip. She was 22 years old and studying space science at the University of Colorado. Her long, dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her eyes were bright with excitement. "Mom, Dad, Jake," she called out as she kicked off her shoes. "You have to see this." Jake looked up from his math homework at the kitchen table. His parents, Carol and Steve, came in from the living room where they had been watching the evening news. "What's got you so worked up?" Carol asked, smoothing down her son's messy hair as she passed him. Lisa pulled out her laptop and set it on the kitchen table, pushing Jake's worksheets to one side. "Remember how I told you about the message that came from space last week? The one that all the universities got?" Steve nodded. He worked at the post office and didn't understand much about his daughter's studies, but he always listened when she talked about space. "The aliens sent us some kind of test, right?" "Not just any test," Lisa said, opening her laptop. "They sent us a riddle that nobody in the entire galaxy can solve. And I mean nobody. Species that are millions of years older than us have been working on this for 3 years. The laptop screen came to life, showing a document filled with strange symbols. They looked almost like numbers and math signs, but they were arranged in patterns that hurt to look at for too long. The symbols seemed to shift and move when Jake wasn't looking directly at them. "Professor Clark's research team has been working on this all week," Lisa continued, "along with teams from Harvard, MIT, and every other major university in the world. But nobody can figure it out." Jake leaned closer to the screen. The symbols reminded him of something, but he couldn't remember. "What? What happens if someone solves it?" "According to the message, it unlocks some kind of amazing technology, something that could change everything for humanity." Lisa scrolled through pages of notes that her research team had made. "But honestly, at this point, I think it might be impossible." Carol frowned at the screen. "Those symbols look like they're giving me a headache just looking at them." "That's what everyone says," Lisa replied. "Professor Clark thinks there might be something about the way human brains work that makes it hard for us to process the pattern. The aliens who sent this might think completely differently than we do." Jake couldn't stop staring at the symbols. There was something familiar about them, like a song he had heard before but couldn't quite remember. "Can I look at this for a while?" Lisa laughed. "Jake, if teams of scientists with advanced computers can't solve this, I don't think a 7th grader is going to crack it." "I know," Jake said quietly. "I just want to try." Steve ruffled his son's hair. "Let him look, Lisa. What's the harm? Maybe fresh eyes will see something the experts missed." Lisa shrugged and turned the laptop toward Jake. "Sure, but don't stay up too late with it. You have school tomorrow." After dinner, Jake took the laptop to his room. He printed out copies of the riddle and taped them to his wall next to his posters of spaceships and planets. For the next 2 hours, he stared at the symbols, turning the pages different ways and trying to see patterns. The more he looked, the more familiar they seemed. It was like trying to remember a dream that was slipping away. Jake knew he had seen something like this before. But where? The next day at school, Jake could barely concentrate on his classes. During lunch, he showed the printed pages to his best friend Danny Rodriguez. Danny was good at video games and always found shortcuts that other players missed. "These look weird," Danny said, squinting at the symbols over his sandwich. "They remind me of something from that puzzle game I showed you last month. You know, the one where you had to look at the same picture from different directions to solve it." Jake's heart started beating faster. "The one where the answer changed depending on how you looked at it?" "Yeah, that's the one. Remember how frustrated you got because the same shape looked like a circle from one side and a square from another side? And you had to accept that it was both things at the same time to win the game." Suddenly, Jake felt like a light bulb had turned on in his head. He stared at the symbols again, but this time he tried not to think of them as math problems or word puzzles. What if they weren't supposed to be solved like normal puzzles at all? That afternoon, Jake rushed home and went straight to his room. He spread the papers out on his floor and got down on his hands and knees to look at them from different angles. He held them up to the light, looked at them in the mirror, and even tried looking at them upside down. As the sun set outside his window, Jake started to see something that made his hands shake with excitement. The symbols weren't asking for one right answer. They were showing him that the same thing could be true and false at the same time, depending on how you looked at it. Jake had learned about this idea in a book about philosophy that he had borrowed from the library. Some smart people had figured out that contradictory things could both be true. A glass could be half empty and half full. A person could be tall compared to a child, but short compared to a basketball player. But the alien civilizations seemed to think in very logical, straight-line ways. They expected puzzles to have one correct answer. They couldn't accept that something could be two opposite things at the same time. Jake grabbed his notebook and started writing. He drew pictures of the symbols and wrote down his ideas about what they might mean. By bedtime, he was sure he was on the right track, but he needed help to put his solution into the kind of language that scientists would understand. The next morning, Jake called Lisa before she left for her classes. "Lisa, I think I figured something out about the riddle. Can you come over after school? I need your help to write it down properly." Lisa sighed on the other end of the phone. "Jake, I told you if the smartest people on Earth can't solve this, then—" "Please," Jake interrupted. "Just look at what I found. If I'm wrong, you can tell me I'm wrong. But what if I'm not?" There was a long pause. Finally, Lisa said, "Okay, I'll come over after my evening class. But don't get your hopes up too high, little brother." Jake spent the rest of the day at school thinking about the riddle. He drew more pictures in his notebook margins and wrote down all his ideas. His teacher, Mrs. Peterson, noticed that he seemed distracted, but she had seen Jake work through difficult problems before. She decided to let him think. When Jake got home that afternoon, he spread all his work out on the kitchen table and waited for Lisa. He was more excited than he had ever been in his life. He was pretty sure he had solved the impossible puzzle, but he needed his sister to help him prove it to the world. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the evening sky. Among those stars, billions of alien beings continued to struggle with the same riddle that Jake thought he had figured out. None of them knew that the answer might come from a 12-year-old boy in a small town on a planet they barely considered worth noticing. Lisa walked into the kitchen at 8 o'clock that evening, tired from her long day of classes. She found Jake sitting at the table with papers spread everywhere. He had drawn pictures, made charts, and filled 3 notebooks with his ideas about the alien riddle. "Okay, little brother," Lisa said, dropping her backpack and sitting down across from him. "Show me what you think you found." Jake took a deep breath. His hands were shaking a little from excitement and nervousness. "Lisa, what if the riddle isn't asking us to find one right answer? What if it's asking us to accept that opposite things can both be true at the same time?" Lisa frowned and picked up one of Jake's drawings. "What do you mean?" "Look at this symbol here," Jake said, pointing to a shape on the paper. "When I look at it straight on, it looks like the number 8, but when I turn it sideways, it looks like the infinity sign." The alien scientists probably think it has to be one or the other, but what if it's supposed to be both? Lisa studied the drawing more carefully. Jake had sketched the symbol from different angles and written notes around it. "Go on," she said, quietly. "Remember that philosophy book I borrowed from the library last month? It talked about how some things can be contradictory but still both true. Like how light can be a wave and a particle at the same time in physics." Lisa's eyes widened. She was studying astrophysics and knew about quantum mechanics, where particles could indeed be in two states at once. "You're talking about quantum superposition, I guess," Jake said. "I don't know all the fancy science words, but I know that sometimes opposite things can both be real. And I think that's what this riddle is about." Jake pulled out his main notebook and opened it to a page covered with diagrams. "Every symbol in the riddle has at least two meanings. Some have 3 or 4. The alien species keep trying to pick the right meaning, but there is no single right meaning. You have to accept all the meanings at once." Lisa leaned forward, her tiredness forgotten. "Show me how this works with the whole riddle." For the next hour, Jake walked his sister through his solution. He showed her how each symbol could represent multiple ideas simultaneously. When you tried to solve the riddle by picking just one meaning for each symbol, you got impossible answers. But when you accepted that each symbol could mean several contradictory things at the same time, the riddle started to make sense. "It's like looking at one of those optical illusion pictures," Jake explained. "You know, the ones where you can see either a vase or two faces, but not both at the same time unless you relax your eyes and stop trying to focus on just one thing." Lisa stared at her brother's work with growing amazement. "Jake, this is incredible, but I need to translate this into proper mathematical language before anyone will take it seriously." They worked together until midnight. Lisa used her knowledge of advanced mathematics and physics to write Jake's intuitive solution in terms that scientists would understand. She created equations that showed how the symbols could exist in multiple states simultaneously, like particles in quantum mechanics. "We need to test this," Lisa said finally. "If your solution is right, it should work when we apply it to the actual alien artifact data." Lisa opened her laptop and accessed the university's research database. She had permission to use the quantum simulation programs that her professors used for their research. Carefully, she input Jake's solution, translating his drawings and ideas into precise mathematical formulas. The computer worked for several minutes, processing the complex calculations. Jake sat beside his sister, his heart pounding as he watched. The numbers scrolled across the screen. Finally, the computer beeped. The screen showed a single word in bright green letters: "Solution verified." Lisa and Jake stared at the screen in stunned silence. Then Lisa grabbed her phone and called Professor Clark, even though it was past midnight. "Professor, it's Lisa Martinez. I know it's late, but you need to see this. My brother solved the riddle." There was a long pause. "Lisa, what are you talking about?" "The alien riddle." Jake figured it out. The computer verified the solution. "You need to come to the lab right now. Lisa, honey, I think you need some sleep. A 12-year-old boy didn't solve what the greatest minds in the galaxy couldn't." "Professor Clark," Lisa interrupted. "I'm looking at the verification on my screen right now. The solution works. Jake found it." An hour later, Professor Nancy Clark stood in her laboratory with Lisa and Jake staring at the same computer screen. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes behind thick glasses. She had spent 40 years studying mathematics and space science, and she had never seen anything like this. "Run it again," she said quietly. Lisa input the solution a second time. Again, the computer verified that Jake's approach worked. The riddle that had baffled alien civilizations for 3 years was solved by accepting that contradictory things could be true at the same time. Professor Clark sat down heavily in her chair. "This changes everything. Jake, do you understand what you've done?" Jake shrugged. "I solved a puzzle?" "You solved the most important puzzle in galactic history," Professor Clark said. "But more than that, you've shown that human thinking might be fundamentally different from alien thinking. We can accept contradictions in ways that they apparently cannot." Professor Clark immediately called Dr. Richard Hayes, who was Earth's main representative to the Galactic Council. Dr. Hayes lived in Washington, D.C., and usually spoke to alien civilizations on behalf of all humanity. At first, he didn't believe what Professor Clark was telling him. "Nancy, you're saying a child solved this riddle? The same riddle that defeated species with millions of years of advanced evolution?" "Richard, I'm looking at the verified solution right now. It works. We need to transmit this to the Galactic Council immediately." Dr. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. "If this is real, it's going to shock the entire galaxy. Are you absolutely sure?" "Run the verification yourself," Professor Clark said. "I'm sending you all the data now." 2 hours later, Dr. Hayes called back. His voice sounded amazed and a little scared. "Nancy, I've run the solution through every test I can think of. It's correct. We're transmitting it to the Galactic Council within the hour." Jake sat in the laboratory, still not fully understanding what was happening. He had solved a puzzle, just like he solved puzzles every day. But this puzzle was apparently going to change everything for humanity and for the entire galaxy. "Professor," Clark put her hand on Jake's shoulder. "Son, by tomorrow morning, every intelligent being in the galaxy is going to know your name. Are you ready for that?" Jake looked at the computer screen showing his verified solution. Then he looked at his sister Lisa, who was smiling at him with tears in her eyes. Finally, he looked back at Professor Clark. "I guess," he said. "But can I still do regular puzzles too?" Professor Clark laughed despite everything. "Jake, something tells me you're going to have more puzzles to solve than you ever imagined." Outside the laboratory windows, the stars were beginning to fade as dawn approached. Among those stars, the Galactic Council was about to receive a transmission that would change their understanding of intelligence, consciousness, and the nature of reality itself. And it was all because a 12-year-old boy from Colorado had learned to see puzzles in a way that no one else in the galaxy had ever thought to try. The news traveled across the galaxy faster than light itself. Within 6 hours of Earth's transmission, every major civilization in the Galactic Council had received Jake's solution. The reaction was immediate and explosive. On the crystal world of Zerion, the crystalline minds gathered in their great thinking chambers. For 3 years they had devoted their entire civilization to solving the riddle. They were beings of pure mathematical thought, creatures who could process millions of calculations in seconds. The idea that a young member of a primitive species had solved their greatest challenge was almost impossible to accept. "This cannot be correct," sang Harmony of Numbers, the greatest of the crystal minds. "Run the verification again." But no matter how many times they tested Jake's solution, the result was the same. The riddle was solved. The human boy had found an answer that none of them had even considered. On the world of Terminus, the collective experienced something they had never felt before: individual confusion within their shared mind. 1 trillion consciousnesses had worked together on this problem, and they had failed where one small human mind had succeeded. "How is this possible?" they asked themselves in perfect unison. "We are many minds working as one. How can one mind working alone surpass our combined intelligence?" The ancient architects on their ring world around the star veil were perhaps the most shocked of all. They had built wonders that spanned solar systems. They had created life itself. Yet a child from a world they barely noticed had accomplished what they could not. But the greatest shock came when they applied Jake's solution to the convergence key artifact itself. The ancient device didn't just activate, it transformed. The black cube began to glow with colors that had no names, and it started to emit a sound that was felt rather than heard. Every species that heard this sound suddenly experienced something unprecedented. They could feel what it was like to think the way other species thought. For the first time in galactic history, the crystalline minds could understand what it felt like to have emotions. The warlike Score warriors could feel the peaceful contentment of the Benthara traders. The gas cloud beings of Nebula Prime could imagine what it was like to have a solid body. The technology released by the artifact was even more amazing than anyone had predicted. It wasn't just a way to travel between galaxies instantly. It was a method of truly understanding other forms of consciousness and life. Back on Earth, Jake woke up the morning after his solution was transmitted to find his life completely changed. News vans filled the street outside his house. Reporters from around the world wanted to interview the boy who had solved the galaxy's greatest mystery. Carol Martinez peeked through the curtains at the crowd outside. "Steve, what are we going to do? There must be 50 reporters out there." Steve was on the phone with someone from the government. "I understand, sir, but he's just a 12-year-old boy. He needs to go to school and live a normal life." But Jake's life would never be normal again. Dr. Hayes had flown in from Washington, D.C. that morning, along with officials from NASA and representatives from universities around the world. They all wanted to meet the boy who had changed everything. Jake sat in his living room still wearing his pajamas while important adults talked about him as if he wasn't there. He felt confused and a little scared. All he had done was solve a puzzle, but everyone was acting like he had done something impossible. Lisa sat beside him on the couch. "How are you feeling, little brother?" "I don't understand why everyone is so excited," Jake said quietly. "It wasn't that hard once I figured out the trick. The aliens just needed to stop thinking so logically about everything." Dr. Hayes overheard him and laughed. "Jake, what you just said is going to revolutionize how we think about intelligence itself. You've shown that human creativity and our ability to accept contradictions might be our greatest strength." The phone rang constantly. Universities wanted to study Jake. Governments wanted to protect him. Scientists wanted to understand how his mind worked. But the most amazing calls came from space itself. The first alien species to contact Earth directly was the peaceful Viridians. Their message was simple. "We wish to thank the young human Jake Martinez. His solution has brought harmony to our conflicts with the Draconic Empire. For the first time, we can understand each other's perspectives." More messages followed. The Score Warriors, who had been fighting the Benthara traitors for centuries, announced that they had made peace after using the new technology to understand each other's viewpoints. Species that had been enemies for millennia were becoming allies. But not everyone was happy. The Crystalline Minds sent a formal protest to the Galactic Council. "This human child has disrupted the natural order," they complained. "Intelligence should follow logical patterns. This chaotic human thinking threatens everything we have built." Some human leaders were worried too. "What if this makes other species jealous of humanity?" asked General Patricia Brown from the Pentagon. "What if they see us as a threat?" Jake listened to all these conversations with growing confusion. He had solved a puzzle to help people, but it seemed like he had also created new problems. That afternoon, he asked Lisa if he had done something wrong. "Jake, you did something amazing," Lisa told him. But amazing things sometimes scare people. Some of the alien species are proud, and it hurts their feelings that you solved something they couldn't. And some people on Earth are worried about what this means for our future. The next day brought even bigger changes. The Galactic Council sent an official invitation for Jake to address them in person. They wanted him to come to their Great Hall and explain his solution to representatives from across the galaxy. "Absolutely not," Carol said when Dr. Hayes told them about the invitation. "He's 12 years old. I'm not sending my son into space to talk to aliens." But Jake surprised everyone. "Mom, I think I should go. Maybe I can help solve other problems too. Maybe I can help the species who are angry understand that being different isn't bad." Professor Clark had been studying the data from the alien artifact all week. She made a discovery that changed everything. "The technology doesn't just let species understand each other," she announced. "It's creating new forms of cooperation we never thought possible. Mixed species research teams are solving problems that seemed impossible yesterday." The galaxy was changing rapidly. On worlds throughout the spiral arms, beings who had never been able to communicate were working together. Old enemies were becoming friends. Ancient mysteries were being solved by teams that combined different types of thinking. But there were also new tensions. Some species felt embarrassed that humans had surpassed them. Others worried that the new technology was changing their civilizations too quickly. A few extremist groups began to argue that the Galactic Council should limit human involvement in galactic affairs. Jake spent his days trying to keep up with his regular schoolwork while also helping scientists understand his thought processes. Researchers from around the world wanted to study how he had solved the riddle. They discovered that Jake's approach, accepting contradictions and seeing problems from multiple perspectives simultaneously, was something that came naturally to many humans, especially children. Human brains might be specially adapted for this kind of thinking, explained Dr. Susan Park, a neurologist who had flown in from California. We're not as rigidly logical as many alien species appear to be. That flexibility might be our greatest gift to the galaxy. As Jake prepared for his trip to address the Galactic Council, he wondered what other impossible problems might be waiting out there among the stars. He was just a kid who liked puzzles, but apparently his way of thinking was exactly what the galaxy needed. The hardest part was that he still had to finish his math homework every night, even though he had just solved a problem that had stumped the greatest minds in the universe. Some things, Jake realized, never changed, no matter how famous you became. 1 year after Jake Martinez solved the riddle that changed the galaxy, he stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council wearing his best suit and trying not to feel nervous. The same hall where alien leaders had once admitted defeat now buzzed with excitement and hope. Jake was 13 now, a little taller but still the same quiet boy who loved puzzles. Beside him stood his new mentor, Sage Elandra, a wise being from the planet Viridia, who looked like a tall human with silver skin and kind eyes that changed color with her emotions. On his other side was Unity of Patterns, a crystalline mind, who had once opposed Jake's solution, but now worked with him to solve galactic problems. "Remember, young Jake," Sage Elandra said softly, "speak from your heart. That is where your greatest wisdom comes from." Unity of Patterns chimed in harmonious tones. "And remember that what once seemed like our failure has become the galaxy's greatest success. We are grateful for the lesson you taught us." The hall was different now. Instead of rigid circles separated by species, the seating mixed different alien races together. Crystalline minds sat next to gas cloud beings. Ancient architects shared space with young aquatic species from the outer rim. The new technology had made it possible for all these different forms of life to understand each other in ways they never had before. Prime Council leader Zethara called for attention with her forearms raised high. "Friends of the galaxy, we gather today to celebrate 1 year of unprecedented cooperation and discovery. But first, let us hear from the young human who made it all possible." Jake walked to the center of the Great Hall, looking up at thousands of alien beings who represented billions of different life forms. He felt small but not afraid. These beings had become his friends over the past year, even the ones who had initially been angry about his solution. "Thank you for inviting me here," Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "A year ago I was just a kid who liked puzzles. I still am, but now I understand that the best puzzles are the ones that bring people together instead of keeping them apart." He gestured toward the mixed seating around him. "When I first saw your riddle, I thought it was impossible too. But then I realized that impossible just means we haven't found the right way to look at the problem yet. The riddle wasn't asking for one correct answer. It was asking us to accept that many different answers could all be true at the same time." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd in dozens of different languages and sounds. "This past year I've learned that the same thing is true about species and civilizations," Jake continued. "The crystalline minds aren't better or worse than humans just because they think differently. The warrior score aren't wrong for being aggressive, and the peaceful Benthara aren't weak for avoiding conflict. We're all just different ways of being intelligent and alive." In the audience, former enemies sat side by side. The score warrior chief Graxton nodded respectfully to the Benthara traitor leader Sofara. 6 months ago, their species had been locked in a war that lasted 3 centuries. Now they ran joint colonies that were thriving like never before. Jake pulled out a small object from his pocket, a puzzle cube made of materials from 17 different worlds. "My friends from across the galaxy gave me this. Each piece comes from a different species, but they all fit together perfectly to make something beautiful. That's what I think the galaxy can be." He twisted the cube, and it began to glow with the same harmonic light as the original convergence key. The technology had advanced far beyond what anyone had imagined. Now it wasn't just about understanding other perspectives. It was about creating new forms of cooperation that used the best qualities of every species. "I've been working with teams from all over the galaxy this year," Jake said. "We solved the Viridian energy crisis by combining crystal-mind mathematics with architect engineering and human creativity. We helped the water world of Aquatica build floating cities using techniques from species who had never even seen an ocean." The crowd erupted in cheers and celebration sounds that ranged from musical chimes to rumbling roars to the whistle of wind through crystalline formations. "But the most important thing I've learned," Jake continued when the noise died down, "is that being different isn't a problem to solve. It's a strength to celebrate. Every species, every individual, every way of thinking makes the galaxy richer and more interesting." Prime Leader Zethara stood and addressed the assembly. "The Council has voted unanimously to restructure our government. We will no longer rank species by technological advancement or age. Instead, we will value the unique contributions that each civilization brings to our galactic family." Unity of Patterns chimed forward to speak. "The crystalline minds have learned that logic alone is not enough. We now work with species who think with emotion, intuition, and creativity. Our combined efforts have achieved more in 1 year than we accomplished in the previous 1,000. The ancient architect Stor Avalon, whose species had built wonders that spanned solar systems, rose like a moving mountain. The young human has taught us that wisdom does not come from age or power. It comes from openness to new ideas and respect for different ways of thinking." Over the following hours, representatives from across the galaxy shared their stories. The gas beings of Nebula Prime had learned to communicate with solid matter species. The Hive Mind Collective had discovered the value of individual thinking. Species that had never left their home systems were now exploring the galaxy with partners who had been traveling the stars for millions of years. Jake listened to each story with growing amazement. He had solved one puzzle, but it had opened the door to solving hundreds of others. Problems that had seemed impossible for millennia were being solved by teams that combined different types of intelligence and perspective. Later that day, Jake sat in a quiet garden aboard the council station with Lisa, who had become a respected researcher in xenopsychology, the study of how different species think and feel. She was working on a project to help human children and alien younglings learn together. "Do you ever miss when life was simple?" Lisa asked, watching alien butterflies with crystalline wings flutter around flowers that sang in harmony. Jake smiled and pulled out a new puzzle that had arrived that morning from the Andromeda Galaxy. "Life was never simple. I just didn't know how complicated it was yet." The puzzle was from a species that humanity had never met before. They lived in a galaxy so far away that their messages took months to arrive even with the fastest technology. But they had heard about the boy who solved impossible riddles, and they had a problem that they hoped he could help with. Jake studied the new puzzle as alien suns set behind the council station. Tomorrow he would start working on it with his team of alien and human friends. He knew that whatever the solution turned out to be, it would probably lead to new discoveries and new friendships across the vast universe. The galaxy was huge and full of wonders that no one had even imagined yet. But Jake Martinez, the 13-year-old boy from Pine Valley, Colorado, was no longer afraid of impossible puzzles. He had learned that the best solutions came from bringing different minds together and accepting that the universe was big enough for every way of thinking to be valuable. Somewhere among the stars, other young beings, human and alien alike, were learning that impossible was just another word for not yet solved. And that was exactly the way Jake liked it.